Hi, it's Raghu. I'm back with Mindrolling and Daniele Bolelli, old friend,
Here we
and
go. We are
uh,
all today. We get to
we're
chat about fun stuff.
we're townies. We're townie mates, kind of, you know. Um, so I was just what I was looking for, Danielle. Actually, was I was just on the phone with Duncan Trussell an hour or so ago. We were just catching up, and then I saw in your let's see. I don't remember the name of the book, but I'm going to bring it up right now that you had put together that I was sent. And in it, Duncan says, Bolelli is a genius warrior philosopher. Is that great or what?
That's very sweet. When Duncan gets going, you know something good is gonna come out. So
Yeah.
it's always been sweet.
But yeah, Danielle and I have done podcasts over the last couple of years and more than that, maybe. And yeah, I love your point of view, Danielle. And it's been very refreshing over these years to talk about whatever the heck we talk about. So I'm happy for that. So, first of all, though, Danielle, he was AWOL there for a while. Okay. And he took off and he went around the world, basically, or to the east, right?
Yeah.
What happened? Why did you leave me here?
So I got to do some fun traveling. I had the chance for the first time ever. I got to go to Japan. I'd never been to Japan, and it was pretty awesome. There was this company that organizes historical tours, and so they asked me to go along, where if I could just deliver lectures about the history of the places they were going to check out in Japan. And I was like, yeah, I can do that. And the people over there were really nice, and we got to see a whole bunch of places. Has been funny because my lady came with me, and she still, I don't know if she's ever gonna get over Japan. She's obsessed with everything
Oh,
Japanese
really?
ever seen. She loved it so much. It's like it
Yeah.
was almost like a past lives thing, right? It's like
Really? Yeah.
you like it too much. Like there's more than just the logical reasons here. There it's just too
Yeah.
bizarre.
Yeah, well, the sophistication of the
Yeah.
culture to the design and the landscape, it's just,
Yeah.
I've
Yeah. Yeah.
never been there except in the airport. So, yeah, it's one place that I've always wanted to go.
It was incredible. I had no particular expectation. I was just like, yeah, let's go check it out. Let's see what's going on. I was pretty blown away by everything, honestly. And so that was round one. And then I came back just in time to get solidly sick for like 3 weeks with some respiratory thing. And then I got over
Oh,
that.
I
And
didn't know that. Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, it was one of those where I didn't test positive for COVID, but I spent 3 weeks coughing my lungs out,
Oh,
and then
Jesus
got
God.
over it. And then I went to Italy and spent 6 weeks in Italy. And wow, it's probably, I grew up in Italy and I've gone back more or less, I think every single year. Maybe I skipped the year when
Oh,
my
really?
daughter was born. And this is the time that I loved it the most. I was there and I'm like, you know what? Why am I going back? I mean, no, I know there are good things in US and I enjoy them, but it was the first time that I actually thought, you know what? I could move back here and be really happy out here.
Really?
Yeah,
And?
yeah, that's fun. And, right now my daughter is in school
Oh,
here.
right,
And
right,
so I'm
right.
thinking, for the next few years, I think my goal is going to arrange things to be able to spend, I don't know, 2, 3 months of the year in Italy.
Oh, that's cool.
And then that will keep me calm for a while, and then we'll see. Give it 4 or 5 years, decide what makes that. But honestly, I'm sure if I was in Italy, I would miss things about US. So
Yeah,
it's
right.
uh, it's
Yes, it's
probably the more I can go back and forth, the better.
yeah. Well, our human nature certainly interrupts reality, doesn't it? And
Yeah, yeah,
that's never enough in one sense. In another sense, detachment from having a home base
yeah.
that you are used to feeling comfortable in. That's not a bad thing as well. Anyhow, welcome home.
Thank you so much.
I know it's been a few months, a couple of months, huh? So here's the premise. I told you this the other day. Every morning I walk the dog around the neighborhood, and there's one point at which I have a really great view of what's this top of a mountain, and it looks like the Chief, and it's called the Chief, and we all know about it in Ojai. And every morning it's like, I honor that place in you that's in me, and there's the Chief. And, I might go through a list of, the few Native American elders that I knew of and that I especially was fond of, from Crazy Horse to Sitting Bull and others. And I thought, Danielle has made a huge initiative in your life, right? Around Native American history and who these people were, and more so how what they have to offer is something crucial for us, I feel, these days, given what's going on with the environment, most especially, but also we're lost in divisiveness and the whole 9 yards. So I called on Danielle and said, hey, how about giving us a little bit of what you got when you really went into this in a big way? I don't even know where to start.
I have an idea, since it came to mind as you were talking, where probably my contacts with some Native community are probably the reason why I live in US today and why my life played out the way it did this way. Because I remember back in 1994, I was 20 years old, and I remember I was going through a hard time because I moved here in middle of 92 in the United States. And for the first 6 months to a year, I was having a blast. It was great. And then I started feeling really lonely. I started feeling this culture. I get to meet a lot of people, but I don't have any deep relationships with hardly anybody here. And so I started feeling really, really lonely after a bit. I was in school. I was like, I was in love with these meeting people and quick initial warmth, but then it never goes beyond that. And now I'm struggling. And so I went back to Italy for 6 months. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I wasn't really fitting in there either. So I was feeling kind of stuck, right? Where I don't belong in one place. I don't belong in another. I don't know what to do with myself. And I came back here mainly for the summer. And my mother was like, come with me. She at the time, my mother was, she was working as a journalist. And they had asked her from a human rights organization in Italy to look into the case of this native guy from South Dakota. He was in prison, and they said, the whole case is ridiculous. Can you please look into it? Maybe they listened to you being a journalist. He wasn't getting medical care in prison, things like that. So she did it. They clicked big time. And so then she started helping him, not just on the medical care thing, but on his actual case. And so because of that, she met all of his family and started this long, 10-year process by which she went all out and eventually got him a retrial. And eventually they had to let him go because the original trial was ridiculous. And as a result of that, 10 years of that in and out was, you develop strong contacts with lots of people within the community. And so 94 was the first time that she said, come with me, we'll go. I got invited to the Sundance ceremony. We'll go to Cheyenne River Reservation and, let's just come with me. And so I went with her and a friend of mine, and we drove from California to South Dakota. And we got there. And, I'd been to sweat lodge ceremonies before. I'd been to other things. And honestly, those are things that even when you just read about it, they make sense. You sort of start getting the logic for. I get the, of course the experience is different from whatever you can read in a book, but it's like I get this ceremony, I get the concept, I understand it. The Sundance was not one of those, because Sundance is unlike many of the other ceremonies that can be done whenever you want throughout the year, and it can even be done by an individual, by the communities. The Sundance is a annual ceremony. It's once a year and it's done by a whole community. It's not something that you do on your own. And the part that freaks people out is that during the course of the Sundance, people will dance with usually fasting, sometimes even with no water for 4 days. And then at some point during the breaks of the dance, they will pierce, and then they will be attached from piercing from their chest that's tied to a rope that's attached to a tree. And then they'll dance until whether a few minutes later or a whole 4 days later, they will pull back and break loose. So clearly these, for people who haven't grown up in that, within the cultural context, the obvious question is why, because it's dramatic, it's pretty bloody, it's intense. And so when I read about it, I kind of sort of understood it intellectually, but it didn't really make sense to me. And I remember when we got to the Sundance, first it clicked. Like, I don't know, I couldn't explain it any better than I could before, but it made perfect sense to me while I was there. It was like something beautiful. It wasn't gory, it wasn't weird, it wasn't bloody. I mean, it was bloody in a literal sense, but it wasn't in a... And more than that, it felt like the whole trip, the experience of being there, the experience of the Sundance itself, completely changed my outlook on things. I had no idea what I was going to do 2 weeks later, because I was like, do I go back to Italy? Do I stay in US? But I think it shifted my mind in a way where then all kinds of doors started opening after that. And then I was like, you know what, I'm going to stay in US. This is working out for me. This is cool. And I really attribute it to that one trip going out there that was extremely transformative for me. It was very, very powerful.
So what is the bigger purpose for that particular ritual?
I think there are many. There's a community level, in the sense that you're not just praying for your own personal things. You're also praying for the welfare of your tribe, for the welfare of your community. And if you widen the ring a bit, you're really praying for the welfare of everything that lives, which is one of the things that is always emphasized in ceremonies. At the end of a sweat lodge, or where they use the sentence mitako yasen, which means, for all my relations, where basically you're acknowledging the fact that you're related to everything that lives. And in a sense, when you are bleeding at a Sundance, you are giving of your life force for the sake of everything that lives. Wow. And so it's a beautiful concept in that sense. And then, you see it also on a personal level. You see some guy, because sometimes during the breaks of the Sundance, some Sundancers would speak to everybody gathered about why they are doing that. And, you would have a guy who talks about how maybe he tried to live a certain kind of life. He feels that he has been failing, and he feels he has been stumbling and not having, and he's going through a Sundance because basically, it's such a dramatic commitment that for him is a signal to himself. I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to try to be, for my kids, for my family, to become a different kind of human being, to live up to my ideals and more. And so he goes through that ceremony to essentially ask for help from spirits, from people, from his community, and make that kind of commitment. And so you see all these things, and they are, everybody has different reasons, but it's pretty powerful. It's something that it's intense, that's for sure.
Wow. That interconnected relational thing. That's, of course, in mine and everybody else's minds, that feels like we can be so much better informed in terms of what our reality is. This is just completely in the DNA of these people.
Yep.
What happened to us? We got lost on that one, huh?
There was John Trudell was this. He was a leader of the American Indian movement. He was a great poet and musician.
What was his name?
John Trudell.
John Trudell. Yes, John. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, he was
contemporary.
Yeah. He died a few years ago.
Yeah.
He was. He had some music albums that were produced. Actually, oddly enough, they were produced by Angelina Jolie. If I remember correctly, is John
Really?
Trudell was married to Angelina Jolie's mom or stepmom, something like
Oh,
that.
yeah?
There was a relation there, and there
Uh-huh.
was, and John Trudell was a
Mm.
great poet, brilliant guy. And one of the things that he always hammered on was saying, look, this stuff that I'm talking about is not just my people, it's not just native stuff. This is something that we all had in our past. Every single society on earth, the ancestor of every single person on earth come from tribes. We all come from tribes that lived on the land that had a certain. Some people had lost that connection much long ago, versus others have it's much more recent or it's even contemporary.
Yeah.
But he said the root is the same. The root is the same everywhere you go. You go far back into the past for some people, but doesn't matter how far you go, you still are going to find the same things.
Yeah.
It's just how much removed some cultures have been from that life. And I think it shows up in multiple levels, because definitely the idea you brought up, the interconnectedness, is a huge one, but also the sense of community. That's one of the things that I loved being on visiting people. It was, sometimes you go to reservations where there's poverty and there's substance abuse and there's this and there's a million problems, and you would be silly to gloss over it or pretend they don't exist. And yet, despite all the dysfunction, you also can feel a functioning community in some places where, despite all that, there still are ties and that you can't even dream about in many other places. It's like I was reading a statistic recently that I think it was like 15% of men and 12% of women, if I remember correctly, in US report not having a single friend. Not like 2 or 3 friends that they see once in a while, like 0.0.
Oh my.
15%, that's millions of people throughout US. It's like what? We have 300, 400 million. So that's like probably 30 million people, 30, 40 million people, somewhere around there. And that's only the people who say they have zero. Never mind the ones that do have a friend or 2 or 3, but they talk once every 3 months and they see each other twice a year. So yeah, I mean, you have friends, but you don't have a functioning community on any level. So loneliness is one of those epidemics that's killing us on a mental health level. And so when you see functioning communities, it's a beautiful thing, because that sense of relation that exists with this group of people that are not just your nuclear family, but extend beyond that. It's fantastic. It's something that I love.
Yeah. I mean, what you're expressing is what we encountered when we were, and kids that went to India. Kids, I mean, early 20s.
Yep.
That's what we encountered. And that became our de facto family and community throughout these decades, and still to this day, So, all right, go historically. There's some figures that, like when I walk up and I look at the chief, there's a reason they call him the chief. And how far back do you go with 1800s with some of the people that we've talked about?
Sure. I mean, there's of course, when you talk about native history, the further back you go, because in many cases there are no written records, and so the further back you go, the more you have to rely just on the testimony of a missionary going by, telling you story. And so, it gets trickier. So of course there are things that can go back very far into the past, but the more recent is easier to dig into it because we have just more material about it. So a lot of the stuff I've covered, not the only things, but I've covered a lot of Lakota culture in the 1800s. So I did a series on Crazy Horse. I did a series on Sitting Bull. I did a series on, the clash between the U.S. and the Lakota over the Black Hills. And then also to complete that picture, because, so much of it is from a Lakota standpoint, and, some of their tribal enemies were the Crows. So then I did a couple of series about the Crows and about seeing it from their point of view. And it makes sense when you see it from their point of view. You get why they were. So but yeah, I find all kind of native cultures fascinating, but I think I focused a lot of my work has gone primarily on Great Plains in the 1800s, for sure.
Uh-huh. When I said, "Oh yeah, let's we'll talk about a few of the chiefs and maybe you can quote some of what they said or what's recorded." And I said, my favorite somehow, and I don't even know how, is Crazy Horse. And then you said, well, he was very quiet.
Yep. Yeah.
Can you at least tell us about him, anecdotes that through your research?
Crazy Horse is my first really long series that I did in podcasting, because it was, I think, episode 7 through 10 of History on Fire. And, each one are 2 hours, hour and a half. So it's like 7 or 8 hours of Crazy Horse biography I did. So I went pretty
He wasn't
deep.
that quiet then.
Well, he was, let's put it away, big time a man of action. As far as words go, everybody remarked how soft-spoken the guy was, how very just few words, very mellow. He was also heavily traumatized. He was a guy who, when you look at his life stories...
Well, all of natives were heavily traumatized.
But, in his case, it's like his mom killed herself when he was 5 years old. And supposedly that messed him up enough that he didn't speak for 2 years after that. And then he had almost had to relearn how to speak by the time he was 2 or 3 years after that. And then, his uncle got killed in battle around the same time. And then you go through his life, and it's one story of... I think that's the paradox of Crazy Horse, that on one hand is a guy with this incredible personal power, where he could pull off things that few people could. And on the other side, he was constantly unable to protect the people he loved. And so from his daughter dying of cholera, to his brother dying, to his mom dying, you go down the list, is like the amount of loss that the guys have in a relatively short life, because he dies in his mid-30s. It's pretty crazy.
Oh, really?
It's like the amount of people close to him who died is nuts. It's like, how does anybody's psyche takes it, And it's and he clearly was scarred by the whole thing. He was clearly traumatized, and he was and he was very much like, he's almost the archetype for the strong silent type, very quiet, not a whole lot to say, but his actions were always very larger than life. Everybody was kind of waiting to see what he would do, type of thing, in many situations.
Such as?
For one, he was just because of some of the visions he had, and like some of the belief is that, and again, who knows exactly what's real and what's not, because the legend got passed along so many times that it's hard to. But the legend is that he essentially felt that he could not be killed in battle. Spirits had promised him that he could not be killed in battle, and he could be killed, and he would be killed when other Lakotas were holding him back. And so partially because of this belief, he was absolutely fearless when it came to, somebody fell off a horse in the middle of a battle, he would charge in the middle of the enemy to scoop them up in the middle of bullets flying and all of that. And he would come through alive. So the feeling was like, wow, this guy really has some spiritual power that allows him to pull off these kind of things, And so he, the Crazy Horse story it's a warrior story to a large degree, because at the time when he grew up was the time of, more or less from the time he was 14 forward, is the time when wars between the US and the Lakota started and continued through the rest of his life, And so he features prominently in a lot of those, from the famous Battle of the Little Bighorn to a whole bunch of other occasions. He always shows up.
Yeah, right. And so I think then you said, well, there are a couple of chiefs, and they do have something to say, because I guess we're looking, aside from the reality that Crazy Horse had incredible, what's called in the East, siddhis, spiritual
Hmm.
powers. And what he did was massively important in terms of so many levels, from courage and,
Hmm.
the way he lived his life, simplicity, and so on, is a big message. But who did you think of in terms of people that we could actually quote
I, th-
from?
I think Sitting Bull fits the
Sitting Bull.
bill more than any other because there are so many great quotes that are more or less reliably attributed to Sitting Bull. And he was in contact with American journalists and people who would write stuff down as he was saying it, much more so. Crazy Horse kept to himself a lot, didn't really want to have a whole lot to do with Americans. Whereas Sitting Bull would end up being much more, especially later in his life, toward the last few years, he was definitely much more exposed to it. So we have more of his words. And like there's a one that I was digging up right as we were beginning to record, where he had this one interview with a journalist from the New York Herald, and and then, the guy at one point said, the journalist asked him, I heard that you are a great chief. Why do your people think so much of you? And Sitting Bull replied, your people look up to men because they are rich, right? Because they have much land, many lodges, many women. And the journalist said, yep. And Sitting Bull replied, my people look up to me because I'm poor. That is the difference.
Hmm.
And what it means, if you dig down, or like, what does it mean they look up to me because I'm poor? It means that within that kind of society, the role of somebody in a position of leadership is not to accumulate wealth. And so you pat them on the back because of, oh, look at what they achieve. Your goal is to give away wealth. You give away your time, your energy, and whatever passes through your hands. So often being a leader does not equal being, actually often equals being poor. It means that you are a true leader because you're taking care of everyone else first. You keep whatever the minimum is needed for yourself to be functional. But other than that, being a leader means you're making a commitment to the welfare of the village, not to your own private thing per se. And so a lot of things pass through your hands, but they're also supposed to be given away. You acquire to give away, you acquire to give away. You don't acquire to hoard, to sit on it.
Yes.
And I thought that was a great quote because it
Mm,
captures that in that theme.
just it reminds me of something. It's just wild when you get into any one of these traditions in its purest form, mystical form. They say the same darn thing. It's unbelievable. One day in India, we were with Ram Dass and with Neem Karoli Baba. He turns to him and he goes, a saint doesn't handle money. It just comes
Mhm.
through them. Ramdas,
Yeah.
don't bother with that. So, of course, Ramdas did what any of us would have done. We're from America. Okay, well, we aren't going to touch it, but we'll get somebody else to hold on to it. So he got a bagman. And wherever he'd go, the bagman had to go so he could take care of whatever. I mean, in the literal sense, it was
Yeah.
so absurd. It was like, it's one of the great fun stories that we brought back. It's actually my brother was his bagman,
Oh, that's
who
funny.
had no idea whatsoever how to deal with money at all, right? That wasn't his thing. So it's like perfectly, insane. But no, the idea, that's being expressed here is, what purpose do you have? Basically, what purpose do you have in this life? Is it to self-serve into greater and greater, power and facility through money and fame and all of that? Or even if it's not with that, but is it self-serving to
Yeah.
start with? And look at us right now. It's extraordinary, and there are people though that are pushing back and saying, wait a minute, we got to think of us collectively and who we are, is, not to be in this divisive realm. So again, this is a really beautiful way. I mean, it's nothing more or less than Christ, basically, right?
Absolutely. And that I think is tied to what you were saying a few minutes ago about community. Because of course, the whole Marx idea of the communist model, thinking that it would happen in a post-capitalist society, I think is kind of missing the boat there, thinking that there's a state level where it's going to work well. That's usually not the way it plays out.
Yeah.
Where does it work well? It works well within a tribe where it's not state mandated. It's not this giant organization out there. It's your extended family. So of course you share everything with your extended family. It's your community, it's your friends, it's the people you grow up with. So if you live in this group of 100, 200, 300 people, you know everybody. You care for the overwhelming majority very strongly. So of course, giving away feels natural because these are people for in many cases you will give your life for. So of course you give away possession or whatever they need, and and I think so that connection between possession and loneliness go hand in hand. When you don't have a functioning community, then it's like, okay, lock the door and let me hoard my money and let me feel better about the fact that I'm a lonely bastard by counting my dollars, and at least I see a number that gives me some self-esteem. Whereas when you are part of a functioning community, that's considerably less interesting. And it's much more interesting what you can do with whatever resources you have available to take care of everybody. But of course, that makes sense when you are part of a functioning community. When you're not, it's very hard. And I think that's the difference right there. And Sitting Bull has another one of those. That's a great quote where he says, the white man knows how to make everything, but he does not know how to distribute it, which, is the same concept, right? It's like he's admiring the ability to, hey, look at all the things that you guys can craft. But it's like, the stories go that he was always puzzled when he toured with Buffalo Bill. Wild West show for a year or two. He was always blown away by the level of like super wealth and super poverty in some American cities. And so regularly, whatever money they would pay him, he would give a ton of money to just street kids who were just coming up to him to ask him for $1 type of stuff. And to him was like, well, of course, it's like, but again, he came from, and we're speaking earlier about John Trudell. John Trudell has a great line on this exact same topic where he says, possession, a war that doesn't end. And, this idea that it's like the struggle for accumulation of possession, of material possession, is this never-ending war. There's never a point where you're satisfied.
Hungry ghost is what they call it in the East.
Hungry ghost is actually funny that you say that, because that's where my mind was going, because there's in Ojibwa tradition, Great Lakes. Among the Ojibwa, there's the figure of the Wendigo. The Wendigo is this demon.
The winged?
It's called Wendigo.
Wind eagle.
Wendigo is like Windingo. It's all one word. And the idea of that is that it's a demon that eats human beings, but the more it eats, the hungrier it gets. So there's never a point where it stops, if anything. And so the Wendigo needs to be stopped, because otherwise it will devour everything that exists, because the hunger is constantly growing. There's never a point where it's placated or like, oh, I had enough. No, now I need more. Now I need more, which is a perfect metaphor for that system that we are discussing about, where it's never about producing goods to create a good life. Is this never-ending cycle of, but I can make more money. Yeah, that's okay. I got $5 million, but why is not 10? Why is it not 20? Why can't I, is this constant pushing of satisfaction and finding a sense of meaning and peace on some distant goals, something that needs to be conquered. And then no matter if you're able to conquer it, you're never really there. You need to go, no, okay, well, that was then great, but now I have this other goal. And so when Trudell say possession, a war that doesn't end, that to me speak to me in that regard, in this idea that it's an addiction. That's what it is. It becomes an addiction for something else that you are missing in your life.
We are all addicted. We are all addicted, however subtle it may get.
Yep.
It's core to who we are as humans, and gives us the opportunity to get ourselves just transported out of that self-interest, and that's a good thing. It reminds me of the story. Do you know the story of this Tibetan Buddhism, Milarepa, who brought Buddhism to Tibet? His guru was named Marpa, and so he went, and he was wanting to get everything from his guru to allow him to transform. Everybody out there, they're real Buddhists. I'm butchering this, so don't come back at me, okay? But the essence is there, which is Marpa said, well, build this house, and then, we'll see. He built the house. Impeccable. But obviously there was something going on that still had tentacles, one way or the other. Tear it down, build it again. 10 times. Okay, so he obviously he was completely, one level. There's only one level. There's so many levels, and this was the level that I particularly was impressed by. Eradicating the tentacles of attachment in one way or the other. Attachment to getting teachings, God knows what. But yeah, this is what great, shall we say, grace to have somebody care enough to do that, to help free you, And that's what I think of these great beings, and that's what they do for us. And just hearing just a couple of small phrases from Sitting Bull, it's amazing. Who else? Who you got out there?
I think I guess I'll throw one last Sitting Bull one, and then we go into other things. There's one that I love a lot because he recognizes that things are probably not going to end up well for him or for his people. He understands that So he has this quote at one point where he's talking to other Lakota and kind of criticizing them for accepting the reservation system. And he has this thing where he says, you guys are fools to make yourselves slaves to a piece of fat bacon, some hardtack, a little sugar and coffee. And he goes into this. But then the part where it gets really interesting for me is where he says, the whites, they may get me at last, but I will have good times till then. He understands that his life is on a clock, right? His time is running out and bad stuff is going to happen, and he knows it. And so he does have, the whites may get me at last, but I will have good times till then. There's this attitude of which, if you take it outside of the context of just Lakota history in the 1800s, everybody deal with the same thing, because everybody gets old, gets sick, dies. Everybody loses a lot in life. There's no coming up saying, I won. That's not the way it works. So I think it's like that attitude of acknowledging that the existential conditions are what they are, while at the same time having that twinkle in your eye that goes like, yeah, but I'll have good times until then, where it doesn't spoil your mood because you know that eventually it all gets destroyed and it all is lost. To me, that captures the perfect existential attitude, where it's like you're not denying reality, you're looking at it straight in the eyes, but at the same time, you're also going like, so what? Yeah, I know that's how it plays out, but let's have fun in the meantime. Let's enjoy life. And that's not an easy thing to do because, many people who tend to put the accent on the life enjoyment, they do so by willingly blinding themselves to the reality that eventually you lose everything. People who focus on the harsher aspects of reality often get depressed by that and feel really down. The ability to look at the harsher aspects, but at the same time enjoying life, that to me is a real skill. That to me, there's something beautiful going on there.
Yeah. You can live on more than one plane of consciousness at the same time. As
Yep.
humans, we can. This is an important point for sure. And it's each one of attending to these planes there is no dismissal at any one point in my mind of the other plane or planes for that matter. Yeah, we are attending to each one fully, mindfully, as the Buddhists would put it. Yeah, who else?
You're asking so about other people. One book that I always love, I mean, it's tricky when you dig deep into it because it's hard to tell how much this was Black Elk, the Lakota Holy Man, and how much is John Neidhart, the writer and poet who collected Black Elk's memoirs and wrote them down. So
there's some great books out there
representing. Yeah, and it's probably a mix of the two. I'm sure Neidhart took embellished some stuff, but a lot of it comes from Black Elk. Trying to separate it is a mess. But Black Elk Speaks is a brilliant book. Black Elk Speaks is packed with great lines conveying, and it's particularly interesting because Black Elk was a young boy when a lot of these events they were talking on. He met Crazy Horse when he was a young kid and stuff, but he was I forgot I want to say maybe 12 when the Battle of the Little Bighorn took place, 13, something like that. So he was a young kid. And then he lived through all the reservation system and he lived through. And part of his story is that when he was a kid, he started having these visions. And so he became a medicine person for the tribe because he kept having these visions from spirits and all of that. And he was to use his power in a way that would benefit the way a medicine man does. And it's his stuff is it's a beautiful book. It's very, very interesting. You get him. That's a fascinating story. If you fast forward another couple of generations within the same culture, there's a book about this man called John Fire, Lame Deer. And there's this book called The Lame Deer, Seeker of Visions. And he's, a few decades afterwards, he grows up in the early 1900s, and he's hilarious because he is a medicine person, and at the same time, he's this wild, crazy guy with affairs with women left and right, wanted by the police, it's a pretty wild story, and his sense of humor is hilarious, So that's a guy that that book I really enjoyed. And then lately, I was digging into some stories. Like when I was telling you about the crows, there's a couple of stories that I covered that I found fascinating. Was one by this guy, Joe Madison Crow. Joe Madison Crow was born kind of at the beginning of the 1900s. And he participated. Joe Madison Crow lived at a time when, on one hand, he was still having this traditional education growing up from his grandparents, and on the other hand, he was going to school. Actually, went to graduate school. Actually, became, I think, the first Crow guy to get a graduate degree. He had a foot in both worlds. And one of the funny stories about him is that when World War II broke out, he was sent to fight in the army in France. And during the fighting, he did the 4 things that a Crow warrior should do to become a war chief, which nobody had done since because the conditions have changed. And one of them, there are things like you are to take a weapon from an enemy. Okay, sure, that's logical. There's, a few others that make sense. And then there's one that in modern warfare is not typical, is you're supposed to take a horse from an enemy, which of course at the time when cavalry is not a thing anymore, good luck doing that. But there's this tale that he has already done 3 of these things, and the 4th one is missing, and he's there, and they see this group of German officers that have holed up in this French farm, and there's a bunch of horses there, and Madison Crow is like, wait, time out, guys. Before anybody think of attacking, let me do this. And he sneaks in, steals the horses, and run off with the horses, and does his 4 deed. And he's a really fun guy. There's a documentary by Ken Burns, where it's a documentary about the Vietnam War. Was it Vietnam War? No, sorry. It must be World War II. Yeah, of course, it must be a World War II story because
Mm,
Giovanni Synchro was in World War II. So I forget the exact title, but it's one of the war documentaries that Ken Burns had done. And then there's a section there where he spent, I don't know, 10 minutes interviewing Joe Madison Crowe when he's this nearly 100-year-old guy and he's reminiscing about his stuff. And he's so funny. Like you see him, you see exactly that classic native sense of humor where he just every other sentence ends in laughter, everything ends with a joke, with something that and it really conveys the energy that you get with some of these guys where humor is constant. From the movies, people expect something more stoic, something more, and that's real. There's
West
that side,
Studi-ish.
and there's that side as well, but that goes with a ton of sense of humor. It's like typically, if you go to somebody and you start talking about something deeply spiritual, often the initial reaction will be a little bit standoffish, like, no, let me crack jokes about what I saw on TV or something. When you have built a rapport, then it's like, okay, now we can talk about other stuff too. But it's like the initial vibe tends to be very, let's build rapport by laughing together, by finding a way that we can laugh at things together.
Yeah. I think even beyond that, Danielle, is you develop that kind of a habit, cultural habit, even in this case, but you develop that habit, you're less likely to be, mired by the dark shit that's in your head, where you can, oh, that's great, laugh a little bit. Not take yourself so self-seriously. That is a huge advantage to not falling into a dark tunnel, that many people have a hard time getting out of because there's so much self-criticism and judgment and so on about all of that. So, yeah, that's just kind of wonderful, huh?
There's one that I heard once. I forget who told me that, but it was a level of because what you're saying about not taking yourself too seriously, that helps. Not that's perfect, right? That's exactly what they would tell you. And there was another level that I thought was brilliant, where they say sometimes the spirits want to laugh. So in the context of a ceremony, you want to, it's sacred, you respect the sacredness, but also you want to keep it light precisely because there are subtle things to be perceived. If you are too rigid, you're not going to be able to perceive them because you're too stuck. When you laugh, you relax. When you relax, you're more open. When you're more open, you can pick up finer things, finer levels.
Subtly.
And so there's that idea of like, and I think I told you, well, we didn't record it, so I should. One time, when was that? About a year ago, when I went, last time I went to the Black Hills and I visited with a Lakota friend of mine, and he brought us, he was telling me like, oh, I want you to meet my grandpa. He's in his 80s. He's one of our guys. He's, one of our elders. And so me, my lady, and my daughter and my friend, we go out, we go to his house and we hang out. And in classic fashion, he just wanted to crack jokes. He sit down and he's just holding court, making us laugh, being a clown for an hour or something. And he's having a great time. He's making us laugh. He's putting on a show. And, there was one point that I found as they were talking, like he was talking with my daughter and finds out that she really loves to sing. And so he's like, oh, I want to hear your songs. And so we played one of her songs. And he closed his eyes and he listened like really intently, right? Just eyes closed, nothing else. And then in that moment, something shifted and you could see that he was like dead serious for a moment, where he started speaking to her about, what you do here with your voice, you're healing people. What you're doing, you think you're a singer, you're a healer. What you're doing is you heal with your song. And so he went into this whole thing, telling her all these really beautiful, sweet things about what she does. But in a very like, no, I mean it, really take care of this because it's something valuable that you have. And, my friend from across the table was kind of wicked at me, saying, like, you see what happens when he turns it on? And now it's like you see the other level of this guy, where he's,
right.
and then, after that, he went back and cracking more jokes and playing. And I was like,
So great.
classic. It's exactly the way it is, where you get these multiple levels at the same time, where the humor is a big part of it, but of course it's not the only thing.
Ram Dass I've quoted this about 1 billion times in the movie Becoming Nobody. The director asks him, "Well, give me 2 things that you would advise for somebody like me getting on a path for transformation." He said, "Yeah, that's easy. Love and humor."
I love that. That's perfect.
Right?
That's perfect. I love that.
Do you have any Black Elk something from
Let's
him
see.
by any chance? Because I love to hear that direct word.
Yeah, of course. Let me look for some Black Elk. Because the quotes are never ending how good they are, but like, let me see. Black Elk.
It's crazy because before you said, it's crazy. Crazy horse. So I'm thinking of him because I'm remembering, actually, my first real introduction was when I just came back from India, and we used to go to see this teacher who had a community gathering. And her name was Hilda Charlton. I've not mentioned her much in this podcast. I've met a number of people there that I've become really close to over these many years. But one of the things that she used to do was communicate with these incredible beings. Mm-hmm. And one of them was Crazy Horse. Now, the others were more, shall we say, more Christian mystic kind of stuff. But there was Crazy Horse. I always thought, wow, I felt like really drawn there. Not so much at that time to these other, they were incredible beings, as was St. Michael, and, all of these incredible beings. And, but there was Crazy Horse, and that was my that's why, and I know very little about him, and what I have to listen to those shows you did. We've talked about that. We're going to do something about that. That's for sure, and generally share it. But yeah, just to hear.
Those ones I really put very much heart and soul into those shows. So I think I think there's something good there. And I really went deep, because considering the amount of sources, which is not a ton, I really dug up everything conceivable that I could dig on the topic in this series. But I dug up in the meantime a couple of Black Elk quotes for you. This one is funny. Speaking of sense of humor, this is when he's also serious. And it's a bitter sense of humor, because he's talking about land loss and being cheated in treaties and stuff. But it's like, there's this quote that said, they, and by they he means the government, he said, they made a treaty with Red Cloud that said that our country would be ours as long as the grass should grow and the water flow. You can see that it's not the grass and the water that I've forgotten, which, there's this bitter humor, but there's humor nonetheless of just this thing of, and there's another one that I thought was interesting, that is more about symbols here. He's talking about how weird for him to live in a home that was square, the way the cabins were built. And he says, it is a bad way to live, for there can be no power in a square. You have noticed that everything an Indian does is in a circle, and that is because of the power of the world always works in circles, and everything tries to be round. In the old days, when we were strong and happy people, all our power came to us from the sacred hoop of the nation. And so long as the hoop was unbroken, the people flourished. Everything the power of the whole world does is in a circle. The sky is round. I've heard that the earth is round like a ball, and so are the stars. The wind, in its greatest power, whirls. Birds make their nest in circle, for theirs is the same religion as ours. The sun comes forth and goes down again in a circle. The moon does the same, and both are round. Even the seasons form a great circles in their changing, and always come back again to where they were. The life of a man is a circle from childhood to childhood, and so it is everything where power moves. Our teepees were round, like the nests of birds, and these were always set in a circle, the nation swoop, a nest of many nests, where the Great Spirit meant for us to hatch our children. But the Wachichus are white people, have put us in these square boxes. Our power is gone and we are dying, for the power is not in us anymore. You can look at our boys and see how it is with us. When we are living by the power of the circle in the way we should, the boys were men at 12 or 13 years of age. But now it takes much longer to mature. And, and so he goes into this whole symbolic thing, but to him is also very real on some level. And I thought that's an interesting quote to capture a little bit of his worldview.
Yeah, no, that's just beautiful. And I suppose how they keep the core of their, I would call it, mystic tradition that underlies everything. You're living in a square house, maybe circumstantially, but everything ritually, everything prayer-wise, everything community-wise is a circle. And that's how, and that's what I think we need to bring into our lives individually, collectively, but mostly collectively, that's what represents wholeness. And we have to return to harmony and wholeness. I don't know why I think of shit like this, but whatever, I think of it when I said harmony and wholeness, that I mean that for us. And at the same time, I was thinking about this book. We're in the middle of pulling together Ram Dass's, from his talks. It's called There Is No Other, going towards, I forget what it is, harmony and wholeness. And and we can get so much from this, the native culture, so much. Hey, I thank you so much for doing this. I
Anytime.
purposefully said to Danielle, please, because every time I go to the corner every morning, there it is, and there. Oh yeah, I got to talk to Danielle. So thank you for fulfilling that wish. That's really.
I'm
great.
glad that the landscape tells you, call Daniele. That's always nice.
That's great. Chief.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, everybody, by the way, you'll go to Be Here Now Network /Mindrolling and go to. You will see the show notes, and I'm beseeching the producers to put in all of the connectivity to Black Elk and his books and everything that we've referenced, or that Danielle has referenced here. We want to make sure it's available to you. That's part of what this is about. And so thanks a bunch. Really.
Thank you so much. This was great, as usual.
Yeah. And this is Mindrolling on Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com, and you will catch a whole bunch of wonderful people who do fantastically what I hope is giving us all material that gives us all opportunities to, just like we just did here for an hour, where we can learn from so many different sources and traditions what help can be given. And boy, we could use a little help.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. And we'll connect you with Danielle too, so websites and all that. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.